about if I get started? And I'm introducing someone who needs no introduction to this wonderful group, but we are absolutely thrilled that our dear friend Ann Collier has agreed to start us out with our inaugural version of our Coaches Chat webinars. And what an exciting thing it is for us to be able to hear all of Ann's expertise, be able to ask questions. And Ann is very relationship oriented, as you all know, so we can feel free to ask questions, present things that have been particular issues for us. And just so you know, of course, Ann has been an esteemed WBA board member for quite some time. She and I remember, as are many of our wonderful people here in the audience. And she has done some fabulous things in her past experience, both as a tax attorney, but now as the CEO of Arudia.com, and which is her own creation, her coaching company, helping so many hundreds of people. And she is driven to help others, has so much expertise in everything from what topic she's going to discuss today, how to handle difficult bullying situations, to being your very best person and best leader that you can be. She has also over a decade of experience with Myers-Briggs type indicators, is a master practitioner for MBTI, tailors training sessions for many. And I just can't say enough about the wonderful things she does and this excellent opportunity for us. So Ann, I'll turn it over to you. And thanks so much to everyone for coming today. Wonderful friends all.
Yeah, thank you all for taking time out of your day. So when I was approached, I tried to think about, well, what would be valuable? Now that I am into my 50s, what I can say is what I wish I knew how to deal with when I was younger was these difficult situations and bullying situations, that sort of thing. And I'm also seeing a lot of people coming in, so that is awesome. Hold on, of course my computer has, it's always a little bit of a challenge. All right, let me go back to what our agenda is for the day. So as Kathy knows, because she's participated in our management academy, I like to lay a foundation of understanding, because if you understand where the behaviors are coming from, you have a lot more access to solutions. The other thing, and that's actually critical in getting a hold of our own emotions, because really what we're fighting when we're in a difficult situation is either how upset or angry or scared we are. I'm going to give you a little background to understand your triggers. This, by the way, is kind of a 3-hour program whittled down into an hour. So what Cynthia is going to do is drop into the chat a few times through the session some materials that we're giving you so that you can have them. But we want to give you access to a powerful mindset. I've written a lot of articles that will sort of help you get there, but also I'm going to give you a framework for thinking about that. And then we're going to talk specific strategies. And as Kathy says, like, we're all friends here, so please interrupt and ask questions. And really what the outcomes that I'm focused on for you is to improve your capacity to remain calm no matter what, to maintain a self-actualized problem-solving mindset. And then lastly, to have some skill in refocusing an unproductive, uncomfortable situation to getting the job done. Usually when somebody's is in a bullying or is exhibiting other unpleasant situations, it's because they're worried about the work getting done. So the point here is that it starts with you. And I just want you to know you can do this. I'll just tell you, for those of you who I haven't shared this with, I used to be painfully shy, which is probably a big surprise. Now, that was a long time ago. That was like 2nd or 3rd grade, but I'm past it. But I still had to deal with some of the remnants of being sort of shy. What we're going to do is access bits and pieces of Dr. William Sparks' Actualized Leader Framework. And the reason I'm showing you Maslow's hierarchy of needs is because one of the 4 cornerstones of this framework is this idea of being self-actualized. And what that basically means is that you're living to your highest potential because of the way that you're dealing with these stressful situations. You're not letting them unnerve you. So when I think about a self-actualized person, and I know many of you, so I know that you are self-actualized, able, no matter what's happened, and we've certainly been tested over the last year and a half, almost 2 years, shockingly, but still staying optimistic, thoughtful, curious, patient, communicating well, listening, resilient, strategic, decisive, friendly, positive, all of those things. And I just want to, a shout out to WBA leadership. I think that our board, our immediate past president, 2 past presidents, Jill Dash and Sedina Montani, just did a fabulous job of exhibiting these, these skills. And Bridget, who's right here, is still carrying on the charge. But no matter what our challenges, we're focused on really serving our members. That's all. I know that this is members only, but I'm just reminding you of all the value that there is in is being a WBA member. So when you're dealing with unpleasant situations and bullying, you're really dealing with somebody else in that reactivity space. And the trick is you just can't go there either. That is really the trick. And you can't succumb or be a victim of another person's impatience, blaming, venting, that kind of thing. So yes, we do not like that. Anybody who hasn't seen my slides before knows that I like lots of pictures. Keep it fun. So what I'm going to share briefly with you now is give you an understanding of motive drivers. So all humans have 3 motive drivers. They're for affiliation, power or control, and achievement, which is about winning through technical expertise. This is the second cornerstone in Dr. Sparks' Actualized Leader Framework. And I know I'm referring to it, and we don't have time to go really deep into that because we want to focus on sort of tactical solutions. But again, in those worksheets and everything that are in the chat, you'll be able to see more. And of course, I already know you, so please reach out if you've got questions. There's also a short form assessment that you can take. I'm not having you take it right now because I want you to pay attention, but you'll find out what your primary leadership style is, and this affects your resilience. So if you're self-actualized, you tend to, and you're driven by people, I'm just showing you this, you're friendly, empathetic, loyal, helpful, generous. When you're at your worst though, and this is because us people, we're kind of conflict avoidant, we can be indecisive. By the way, my cat Greta joined us. If you see a tail waving in front of me, that's her saying hello. She's an affirmer too. Being indecisive because we can't make everybody happy, a little bit dependent, not exercising our own judgment, overly accommodating, and even jealous. Anything that's like a relationship-oriented stress comes from this shadow style, and we're going to get into what the shadows are in just a moment. But I'm changing, for those of you who have seen some version of this presentation before, I'm changing it up a little bit because we're focusing on the sort of the intimidating, the bullying, those kind of unproductive behaviors. And the bottom line is that leadership style that's about being power driven, we call those people asserters. And the bottom line is it's not about power, like being power hungry. It's about being able to get results. And we all want to get results. I know everybody on this call, we're all results driven. So it is about being, trying to produce, get things done. Asserters, especially stronger, intense asserters, tend to be confident, candid, decisive. They take charge of situations. They're focused on outcomes. Now, as I said before, we all have elements of all 3 of these, and our composite leadership style is made up of all 3 at varying strengths. So I am a strong affirmer and only a mild asserter and mild achiever, but everybody has their own mix. So asserters, some of their strengths: rational, objective, analytical, critical thinkers, hardworking, focused, like to solve and grapple with complex problems, right? We all know people who this just stands out, oh yeah, that person is an asserter. I love working with asserters because we're about getting it done. Now, there's a flip side to that. So there's the happy strength side, but then there's the shadow side. And the shadow side comes out when we're under stress. So I love this table. If you've seen this, Dr. Bruce Perry, who's a child psychiatrist who focuses on trauma, has been on tour for his new book. I think he wrote it with Adam Graham, but a friend of mine who's a psychiatrist knows him very well and, turned me on to his work. But what I love here is this table basically comes from his work, but it says what we all know, which is the more stressed we are, kind of the dumber we are, or the more we struggle with problem solving. And there's a lot of data that shows when we're stressed, our like cognitive capacity declines by at least 30%. So look at when you're calm and you're able to abstractly think, do the hard work, versus when you're when you're in fear. You know what I mean? You're reactive. You're able to hopefully jump out of the way of the oncoming car, but you're not able to solve, calculus problems or anything like that. So the point is that when a person is to recognize this in ourselves, but also recognize it in others, because we cannot take another person's fear-driven behaviors personally. And that's what I said, like, I'm really about getting people to have an understanding. Now, the third cornerstone of Dr. Sparks' framework is based on Viktor Frankl's work, a concentration camp survivor, a philosopher, and a psychiatrist. And this idea of we experience what we fear. We bring on the very things that we don't want by traveling down that path to avoid them. So I'll get into that a little bit more if we have time, but it's this idea of self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like when you avoid having a difficult conversation, things actually just get worse, right? We didn't want it to be bad. Well, we just made it worse by avoiding it. So let's look at what the shadow behaviors are. And I want to start with that asserter style, which is, again, where most of that bullying and difficult behaviors come from. So remember, asserters, and we're all asserters in some level, at our best, when we're empowered, we're getting things done, we're taking names and numbers, our team is aligned, and we're liking our work, we're loving it, we're confident, decisive, competitive, candid, courageous, we're making hard decisions, we're getting it done. Again, I would say that our leadership did an outstanding job of demonstrating that over the last couple of years. Triggers, though, for someone who is driven to be in control, the trigger is vulnerability, feeling professionally vulnerable, feeling personally vulnerable. One of our CEOs on a program said, just starts laughing, and he's like, oh yeah, I'm an intense affirmer. The humiliation, of something going wrong is enough to trigger his shadow. So the idea of having a shadow, I changed how I language this because it's so critical to take away from this. The person is disempowered, they're irrational. So think about when you've been subjected to bullying behavior. The person is not being rational. They're not doing what they need to do to get the best out of you, right? If you've ever been impatient, and I'm just going to ask, I'm going to put my hand up first. I have been impatient before. I may have been even impatient this morning. But I try to manage that. The deal is, and again, this is in the worksheet, is you want to know these things about yourself. Like, what are the first signs that I'm stepping into my shadow? And you also and you probably already know, like with the people you live with and work with, like, oh yeah, so-and-so, I can tell they're starting on a bad day. Impatient, a little bit like blunt, that kind of thing. One of my favorite clients has said, yeah, when I'm in my shadow, I'm blunt. And if I'm being perfectly honest, I'm a little manipulative. So again, think about the fact that the bullying comes from this drive that is frustrated. The asserter, and that means all of us, is trying to get stuff done. So what it looks like, asserter shadow examples: maneuvering to take charge of somebody else's project or client, the impatient with staff and colleagues, the yelling, the all caps emails, the interrupting, the dismissing people's views publicly, the asking questions that are intended to undermine or make a person sound like they don't know what they're doing. The bullying, the intimidating others on calls, or dominating the conversation, not listening to them, talking over them, all of that kind of thing. Now, what the asserter needs assurance. So assurance that we've got this. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about what that looks like, but I want you to really understand that that person is feeling vulnerable and out of control. It's not it's a fear-based behavior. Shadow behaviors are all about fear. Fear of betrayal means feeling vulnerable, not knowing something, that kind of thing. Now, the challenge for especially strong or intense asserters is that pushing for results does not equal pushing people. Now, I'm just telling you, if you have been, and I've learned this, that and I live with an intense asserter. So my husband and I have a great relationship and he's super supportive. But let me tell you, I've seen the inside of this leadership style and I've seen what it looks like. So I have lots of good examples. But the point, and the point really is that asserters get so focused on getting things done that they don't understand the difference between pushing people versus pushing for results, and they keep pushing people. So you have to understand that and get your head in a good place for dealing with those behaviors. And I feel like I've gotten really good at it over the years, and this has been something that, if I'm being perfectly frank, my mother's a little bit of a bully. So I've kind of learned how to manage that as well. And, and it's just kind of not, and the biggest thing is not taking it personally, All right, so I want to go on to another of the leadership styles, because again, we all have all of these, but there's particular behaviors that come from all of this. In the handouts that Cynthia put in the chat, you'll get a really good summary of everything in much more detail. So achievers they're driven by achievement, which means winning through technical expertise, like winning because I got it done right. Every single I was dotted, T was crossed, and my penmanship was really excellent. They're dependable, organized, responsible, committed to results, serious about their work, kind of cut to the chase with them. They're very, independent. They like to work independently. They tend to be high individual achievers, driven, focused, competent, controlled, very much perfectionist, which can be an Achilles heel. They tend to be great planners, a backup plan to the backup plan. And they require, if you're working with them, they require concrete feedback. And again, it's all that planfulness and perfection. So they're they can be risk averse as well. So what does this look like when we're looking at the shadow side? What I really want you to focus on is, well, first of all, the achiever shadow is fear of failure. And what that means is it's the catastrophizing. You've pulled one card out and the whole house of cards just falls. When they're empowered and they're at their best, that you can count on them for getting it done right. When they're disempowered and at their worst, when they're worried about making that one mistake, they become either super rigid, they have to move forward with their plan, there's no flexibility, or they become so cautious they don't move forward. That's that perfectionism, analysis paralysis, that kind of thing. But also notice the criticism and the pessimism. So again, if you've been criticized and it's unfair, what I can tell you right now is that it's coming from this shadow. So again, like I love that picture to describe what the fear is, because remember, bad behavior is fear driven. So examples: never accepting somebody else's work, the constant revisions, obsessing over emails, anything written, replaying conversations with colleagues or clients over and over again, concluding disaster. I have coached young lawyers who've spent 4 hours on a 1-paragraph email. And it wasn't because they were assimilating, putting things together, but it just because they just couldn't, because they were so stuck in their shadow. The complaining about everybody, the criticism. By the way, there's self-criticism too that you don't hear. For me, I know that I'm in my achiever shadow when I hear myself criticizing myself, or if I get really pessimistic. That's the other thing. All right. So, and this I can say, by the way, especially since I know so many of you pretty well, is that we got a lot of affirmers on this call. So affirmers, this is that being people driven, right? We're people, warm, friendly, generous, empathetic. We are driven to connect with people. We love those relationships. That's why we like being on teams. That's why we join the WBA. That's why we are on, we volunteer for leadership positions. Nobody's getting paid for this, but we love being able to contribute to our colleagues and being part of a team. The problem though, is that when you're an affirmer in your relationship, is that I will just tell you, the asserters, they know how to push your buttons. I had an asserter client tell me, And this was part of a whole association program that I did. She's like, oh yeah, as an asserter, we know how to push your buttons. We talk about our needs not being met. And if they're not being met, you know, the affirmer, we know the affirmer will be focused on that because the affirmer wants to avoid conflict. And I'm like, all right, well, I'm glad somebody finally said what I always sensed. But here's the deal, is that for affirmers who fear rejection, so remember, driven by relationships, fear disconnection, fear rejection, is that the triggers are anything that might harm the relationship. So when we're at our best, friendly, generous, loyal, empathetic, helpful, you know, people, when we're at our worst, and how I know that I'm in my shadow is, you know, sensitive, insecure, indecisive, and anxious. You know, the indecision is the first thing that comes up. Now, I have like a lot more content on all of this, but I just want to make the point here. I want to keep us going through to get to solutions, is that the real challenge for the affirmer side of all of us, and by the way, the research shows that more women are affirmers. Like we, you know, just statistically, I know everybody has a stronger affirmer drive, you know, than the men do. So remember that. But the thing is, when somebody else is in his or her or their shadow, nothing is personal, but everything feels personal. And that's the hard thing. So when you hear yourself or others concerned in any way about relationships, in any way in the workplace, at home, that's what the challenge is. You know, I actually had a young lawyer say, I couldn't believe they expected me to work with someone I'd never met, which I was like, whoa, okay, that is some shadow behavior. Paralyzed, you know, because you think somebody doesn't like you, anxious or upset because your manager, partner, more senior lawyer doesn't have time for you, client isn't getting back to you. If you're doing business development, oh, this is like in spades. Anxious and indecisive, not knowing how to ask for guidance or reveal a mistake. And then of course, the pandemic has been really, really hard on affirmers. All right, so the point here is to make you aware of these. And what I'm going to suggest you do after the webinar is go into that worksheet. It'll be the page where you see those tables of all the shadows, and circle what you notice about yourself when you start going into your shadow. For all of us, I would imagine impatience is what we feel when we think things aren't happening fast enough. The point is to give you that awareness and objectivity so that you can choose how you, whether you're going to be objective about your own thinking in the situation, or you're going to act out of that vulnerable shadow. Because when you're in your affirmer shadow, you are just not in a good place to negotiate difficult situations. The point here really is to know yourself, know your triggers, whether it's people or difficult situations. By the way, that shadow work all comes from Carl Jung, and he's the third contributor to this actualized leader framework. And again, remembering that, you know, you want to identify which behaviors sort of stress you out. So here's the thing. I had set this up to do as a poll, but you know, if you want to just shout out a couple of situations, that would be awesome. So what are the situations that you find difficult? And we can do this as a poll, but like I said, we all know each other.
Can I start out, Anne?
Yeah, please, Kathy.
So, there are, I think, so many different ways this can show up. And I don't know if you guys have ever been in a situation where you're thrown into something and someone who perhaps is your supervisor, but doesn't have to be. And I'm thinking back years ago, but it sticks with me. Put you in a situation without giving you all the background you need to be successful. So maybe they don't hand you the right file, or they don't tell you, yay, there's a little background on so-and-so you should know before you go into this meeting. So it's like they're not telling you. So it's not that they're, you know, saying you can't do the job like I could. They're just keeping things from you that would help make you successful. How do you try to deal with that?
Yeah. And I can just answer that one right now. I mean, the first of all, it's and I've dealt with this before with associates, like you have to sort of set the expectation that I'm going to look at this file and I'm going to come back to you with questions, and then just ask those good open-ended questions to try to get all the information you can. Sometimes it's just that the more senior person is, you know, just busy. I mean, we're all busy and doesn't think about it. And then other times, and I read something interesting in Harvard Business Review about how sometimes a more senior person can be, for example, jealous of a more junior person's, you know, skill, they're personable. And so they're maybe conscious or unconscious, but there's a little bit of undermining going on there too. You know, anything else you think we should specifically? So thank you, Kathy. That was a really good question. That is an uncomfortable situation. And what's hard about all of this actually is that we don't know if we're being sort of bullying or if this is inappropriate in some way. And so we question ourselves. That's that indecisive, that being an affirmer. I don't want to do the wrong thing. What if I'm completely wrong? That kind of thing. But I don't have what I need to do the work. And actually, I'm going to come back and I'm going to address that a little bit in some of my scenarios and strategies here. And again, like we all know each other, so please interrupt, because I crammed, as Cynthia, my colleague who's on here, she knows I like cram like twice as much information as possible, but I want to have lots of material in case somebody asks the question. So again, like keep in mind that the behavior you see from people, including yourself, is grounded by how you think, which then sort of is tethered up to those buoys of behavior by how you feel. And if you look at Dr. Sparks' research, there are 9 attributes of actualized leaders. And what I would say is that when you're dealing with bullying or other inappropriate behaviors or intimidating behaviors designed to undermine you, you really want to focus on that confidence sequence, which is thinking objectively. So you have to think objectively even about yourself. That's why you have to get your head straight first about dealing with a difficult situation, and then having courage, saying the things you need to say, even if they scare you, and, having candor about a situation. So when I think about objectivity, and those of you who've been on Zoom calls probably already know that Greta's sitting here next to me. So I'm a cat lover. But objectivity is what helps you look at things in a way that you don't get tangled up in it. Like your own emotions and your own fears, but also the other person may just be really busy. In fact, I was just on a call for a lawyer on behalf of my parents, and he was apologizing for interrupting me. I'm like, don't even worry about it. Like I'm like your boss. We're just getting it done, but it's being objective about yourself. So there's some tips. These are in that worksheet too, for building confidence, like objectivity. Really practice describing situations factually and without judgment. This is so easy to say to a group of lawyers because you know exactly what I mean. And this will help you to raise difficult issues, because when you use adjectives or exaggerations, it just puts other people on the defensive. And remember, you're trying to disarm them from their fears. If you're really struggling with, should I say something or not? So you just got to consider the worst case scenario and what priorities are. And what I would say, it's not necessary. You have to think about whether you're going to call somebody on their poor behavior. I think more appropriate, and I think if it goes to a certain level, it's worth it. But again, that's a judgment that you make. But also it's just being able to deal with it in the situation so it gets focused back on the work. And then candor, using neutral language to frame feedback and frame, about the interaction. Biggest thing here is about managing yourself and being calm. I mean, you probably can't, well, actually these days you could do that on your desk. But the point is to just know that to manage your own emotions. So it's really about who you're being, and you want to stay confident, calm, be clear in your communication. You stay away from being reactive, avoid that shadow. Don't get angry and don't be weak. As Kathy knows, I've put together a number of webinars on dealing in our Management Academy and Leadership Academy and dealing with different shadow behaviors. And when a colleague is in their affirmer shadow or achiever shadow, it's easier to coach them. Dealing with somebody who's kind of in this, I'm driving results, I'm pushing too hard. It's more about who you're being in the situation, and it's more about staying calm and managing your own stress around it so that you can, focus the discussion back on what really needs to get done. So when you address a bad situation, stick to the facts and also focus on solving whatever the underlying problem is. And don't be afraid to disagree. In doing this, you're going to have to ignore pot shots, and you're going to have to understand that the upset is really the colleague's choice. That's their shadow behavior, not yours. And as I said, like whether you ignore it or address it is a choice you need to make. And I would say that that depends on a lot of factors. In terms of eschewing your shadow, you know, I always say to affirmers, like, put your own asserter pants on, be ready to deal with the unpleasantness. I mean, that's just what it is. And I will say it gets a lot easier as you do it. If you feel your own asserter shadow coming out, just try to not play the blame game and get angry. Focus on solving the problem. And achievers, I'm just going to share this: tunneling it, obsessing about details. Don't be defensive, you know, don't tunnel in other words, but step back and take a look at the big picture. So in particular, if you feel like somebody's challenging you and you're getting pushed into your shadow, it's your job to not take the bait and avoid that. And what I would say here is to always ask questions, to focus, like, well, what do we need to get done here? What's the most important thing? Because if you can, with someone who's bullying, it's because something's not getting done. They're feeling vulnerable. They're afraid, you know, so getting them focused on solving the problem is really important. I would also say, in the same vein of understanding yourself, we all have this always listening about people, which are affected by our views about a person, a situation, and other things. So don't always, I had a CEO that was having to deal with her board, and she thought she was, in quotes, in trouble. And I said, like, okay, you know, you just have to, be curious and ask questions. Don't assume anything. So make sure that you don't bring your own context and that you're truly open to what might happen, you know? So let's talk about kind of run-in-the-mill kind of bad behavior, just like impatience, blaming, venting, worrying, being obsessive. What you want to do is listen for these shadows. So for the asserter shadow, the lack of control, feeling professionally vulnerable, in particular, impatience, the sense of urgency, trying to drive results, then you know you need to give that person a sense of control. When people are upset because they've overly personalized things, then, you know, it's that reassurance that the relationship is intact. And then the catastrophizing, the pessimism, the criticism, the nitpicking, the overly cautious, the rigid, it's reassuring that person that all the details are under control and that you have enough resources and time. Essentially, what I would say is that curiosity, that's Greta, by the way, curiosity is the antidote to defensiveness, but it's also a way, when you're asking those questions, to get people to share what's really bothering them, so you can actually deal with the underlying issue. It's like, you don't want to just treat symptoms, you want to get the project back on track, right? And I love this, you know, staying curious, not judgmental. I mean, really listening openly. And the other thing, and this might be in some ways my favorite slide, although it's certainly not my prettiest, but when you're focused on blame or avoiding blame, you get lousy results. When you're just focused on finding the solution and you ignore the pot shots, and I'm not saying like be tough in a way that have a thick skin. It's more like, just don't listen to it. Focus your energy instead on the complaining and the bullying. Instead, focus it on what's the person saying underneath that has them worried and has them, you know, behaving in a way that's sort of unproductive. Because the more you're focused on the solution, the quicker you get it, get the project back on track. And then one of the things that I have found for myself, staying out of the asserter shadow, and that I've noticed this with other clients, and that's one of the great joys of doing this kind of work, is you learn so much from other people, is if I have enough information, status information, where things are, I'm fine. But when I don't know what's going on and I'm worried about things not getting done, then I'm concerned. You know, then I'm worried. So that's a way also to sort of manage up or laterally, keeping people looped in on emails, sending this is my Thursday, this is status report, or Friday status report. Let me know if you need anything before the weekend, that kind of thing. So that's kind of that's sort of dealing with kind of the run of the mill, certainly not helpful, but not grossly toxic behavior. Now I want to talk a little bit about triangulation, or the gossip, or the, whatever. And, what we're talking about is like, if you're this person and you're sort of getting blamed for something, or other people are taking credit for your work, what do you do? And the point here is you've got to like remove those blocks. You've got to get everybody connected. I was actually talking to a very good friend, and a third-party consultant sort of threw her under the bus, but had a long-standing relationship with the client. And so what she did is she sent a very courteous email that basically laid out, we checked all of our records and we're very technologically advanced. We don't see that we got the information anywhere. If you could, so it was looping everybody in to make it clear that like, no, we didn't drop the ball. I mean, I have had clients complain to me about how in meetings people can be very, very not obvious, but very, very forward about blaming others for not getting information. And, the best thing you can do is either include people on email, that's your friend, or say, we seem to be having some confusion here. Again, it's always about resolving it. Why don't you and I and the other partner on this get together and talk about, what's been done and what needs to be done? But avoiding the situation does not work. And you don't want to be confrontational about it. It's that your tone is always about resolving the issue. We seem to have some confusion about what's expected here and what's been done. Let's get together and talk about it. If you're working with someone who regularly drops the ball or says, I didn't say that in the meeting, it's an additional thing to have to do, but sending out additional, an email that says, this is looping everybody in. This is my summary of what we all said we would do in the meeting. Who's doing what by when is a good strategy for that. So there's that, but you've got the only way to break down the triangulation is to break down the triangulation, I just want to talk a little bit. Actually, I was looking through my slides to put this together, and I was reminded of a client that we actually put this little sequence together for. And that's when somebody's always saying to you, this is urgent. You have to get it done yesterday. And we've all had that situation, and we've probably all done it too. In this particular circumstance, the client is the affirmer asserter. So here's the thing that I'm really talking about here is when we get some passive aggressive behavior. So when we're talking about passive aggressive behavior, what the deal is when we look at it in this framework is that you've got someone who wants to maintain the relationship, but also wants to get it done, but doesn't want to get it done so hard, like isn't willing to be direct with you and say what that person wants. So they're being nice around, they're dancing around it. They're trying to like manipulate the situation a little bit rather than say something really uncomfortable. The tension is between, I want to be connected to you, but I also want what I want. You end up with, the passive aggressive, the not asking for what they need, failure to think ahead, like realizing the implications of it, and also not taking the time to share information and get buy-in because of that fear of having an uncomfortable conversation. And and then they get angry and frustrated. So this can be really, this can be a real challenge. Again, the point here is about, being calm, trying to manage this, like, what do you need by when, being factual, focus on needs. Don't be afraid to ask the questions that might be uncomfortable, or say, or negotiate deadlines, right? Because if you don't and you can't do it, that's part of the problem. And it's also looping back to being really objective. So when you feel like somebody's not being straight with you, or there's being a little bit passive aggressive, is to not call them on it, like tell them that their behavior is bad, but say, all right, like, I'm sensing you really need this done. When do you really need it done? Like, very much clarifying those things so that you can have a clear communication. And again, it's all about that confidence sequence and sort of taking charge of the situation, as they say, put your big girl pants on and just, and drive the results yourself and be a partner. All right. So I get asked lots of questions about manipulative behavior, right? And I showed you these slides before, but it's like you have to stick to the facts, focus on the problems. Sometimes you have to take self-protective behaviors like those, emails to everybody following up, like, all right, we had this meeting. This is what everybody's, agreed to do by when. Also, don't be afraid to disagree. That's not what was said. And oftentimes you'll find that that others are happy that you stood up. You can do it in a very, very nice way, very with a lot of finesse. But the point is, especially if that affirmer slide, those affirmer slides really resonated with you, and you feel like, yeah, I'm like a stronger, intense affirmer. This stuff is so uncomfortable for me, is just to kind of mentally prepare yourself. And the first step is not taking it personally, just and also having a little empathy, believe it or not, for the person. Like, all right, this person who's being a little bullying or manipulative is just concerned about getting results. That's really what's going on here. Again, that depersonalizes it. And then, what I would say is, always make sure that you are being self-aware, that you're being mindful. Don't be reactive. This is kind of one of my favorite slides. Always pause and reflect and choose the best situation. So if somebody's really coming on too strong, or you don't know what to do, you can always say, you know what, I need to think about this. Let me circle back with you later today or tomorrow. Don't be afraid to buy yourself some time. That's taking some control of the situation. When you're talking about, whether it's talking about the work or the behaviors, staying in that place of being very factual. If you've decided to address it, really just, have candor, deal with it, and focus on the path forward. Now, in your in the handout, one of the handouts that Cynthia put in the chat, and she can re-put it in the chat, there's a facilitation guide for one of our manager webinars, and there are tips for dealing with the asserter shadow. So I've got the 10 tips, and there's like a little bit more material there too. But I'll just leave these up for a minute, since we have, I wanted to leave some time for Q&A. And so, or if you want to review the tips and have any questions. But any questions or comments about this?
And this is great. This is wonderful information. I put something in the chat. Is it good to try to see the best in everyone when you get some of the shadows, and recognize that most people, I take the position that all people are working toward a successful outcome. So even though they handle things differently from the way you do, is it best to try to accept the fact that we're working on the same team, we're trying to accomplish a good goal, and that helps you deal with the shadow a little bit more.
Yeah. And what I would say too is, you kind of took the words right out of my mouth. When I look at this shadow, like these shadow behaviors, like, first of all, nobody's shadow is pretty, and we all have all of them. So, there's that. But also to really have that place of empathy, this person is scared something's not going to get done. And then likewise, when you've got this shadow, this person is really afraid that one mistake is going to cause a catastrophe. And it feels real when you're in the middle of it. That's the whammy of it all. And so I even put a little bit more meat on that. It's not even a difference of style, but it's even more like the person is afraid, and they're not thinking clearly because they're afraid. In a lot of these workshops that I do, one of the things that comes up, I'm just looking for another slide, is that most affirmers think like, well, the asserters need to control their shadow. But the truth is that the only person you can control is yourself. So if you find that you're in your affirmer shadow and you get upset because someone is like really direct with you or whatever, like that's on you to manage, right? And that's the empowering thing. You're disempowered when you're in your shadow. And so it to me is really important for us to all like take charge of this, so we're not disempowered. That's the thing. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox. Any more questions? Lauren and Kathy, I know you've seen this material before. I'm going to put up that list of questions here too. Another thing that comes up is also, by the way, let me just share this with you because is that if an asserter can get you in a fight, then you're both fighting, right? But if you're being calm, the asserter that's all agitated and upset starts to like feel like they're looking stupid. You know what I mean? So notice that calm, I hate to say it as a weapon, but staying calm is your best friend and your best defense, right? Because once the other person starts to feel kind of idiotic, then hopefully they'll dial back their behavior and you can focus on the, focus on what's really important. Candace or Rachel, I assume that's you there, or Carrie, Lauren. Anybody else? Any thoughts or questions?
I have a question, Anne. This was a great presentation, really helpful. So now that, we recognize, being in our shadow behavior, or when others are in their shadows based on the characteristics they're describing, we have these tips for dealing with them. But how do we kind of prevent the same types of behaviors or characteristics from showing up in the future? Because those individuals may not even realize that they're in their shadow or exhibiting those behaviors, because that's something that we're now able, thanks to your wonderful presentation, to recognize. But if they haven't had the benefit of, realizing that these characteristics are their typical response, or that they're in their shadow behavior, do you have any, suggestions?
Yeah. So it's all right. So remember, it's all about that slide that I showed you that was about focusing on outcomes and getting results. So if you're talking about the asserter shadow, like you can't talk to somebody about taking preventative measures. It's kind of like, you don't brush your teeth after you have a cavity, you keep doing it all the way along, So what I would do is circle back to the person. Like when you're calm, I would say when you have time, but you're probably gonna have to make time because nobody has time laying around, and just say, I noticed last week, or, I noticed I know you have a relatively new job, we're still getting used to working together, and, that could have been more smoothly. What would work better for you? I always ask that. So before I make a request, I ask first, I get the person engaged in the dialogue around problem solving. Like, what would work better for you? What do you need from me? That kind of thing. I also be careful not to say like, yeah, you seem kind of stressed out, because then you're implying that this asserter who's all about power and control couldn't manage their emotions, And I had a CEO tell me that one of her direct reports said a couple things to her. This is almost along the lines of gaslighting, like, oh, you handled that meeting so well, but it was said with a tone of like, because the last one wasn't that good. And there's a dynamic there. And then the other thing was someone said to me like, oh, well, she was just really stressed out, kind of not owning that there was any responsibility on the part of the person saying that. So in other words, yeah, the other person may have been stressed out, but like, what was your contribution to it? And again, not coming from a place of anything's, bad or wrong, but more like, let's work on our system for working together. There's actually an article in the package called "It's Not You, It's Not Me, It's Our System for Working Together" that kind of makes that point. There's in the package that Cynthia put in the chat, there's a number of articles that I've written for my column in the ABA Law Practice magazine, The Thriving Lawyer. So you'll see lots of things. It's all based on this framework in subtle ways, like listening better, that kind of thing.
I made a huge mistake just talking about the asserter and not saying, yeah, what I can tell you're stressed out or anything like that. But for a holiday gift, I gave a colleague a grounding mat, and it was taken, I was totally legitimately from my heart.
Yeah.
Because he works nonstop, and I thought, he doesn't get to get out much. So I bought it, but he took it so the wrong way, and I'm still living it down. I mean, we're good now, but it was bad.
I know, but but believe me, I feel your pain, because I tend to laugh at a lot of things, but I realize like, okay, in writing that might not come out the right way,
Right, totally.
But yeah, Lauren, going to your question, like looking at this shadow, if you think this shadow is at play, this is about having like checklists. So something I am not, this is my lowest drive. For those of you who know me, you might not be surprised, but I compensate for it by having checklists. So if you've got someone who is super intensely like detail oriented and gets in this shadow a lot, it's the, well, what can we do to make sure you're comfortable that everything's getting done? It's those kinds of questions. And then I heard something great from a client who's an intense affirmer, who they're part of a very senior tax team at a Fortune 100 company. And she said that like when they have something they have to get done, but there are hurt feelings, what she says is, I know we need to talk, but let's focus on getting this done now and then talk about that later, because that signals to the affirmer that like, hey, I care about our relationship. But we got to get this done, you know? So those are some of the things.
Thank you so much, Anne.
Yeah, and also, by the way, during a board retreat that we did yesterday, one of the men who is definitely an affirmer was talking to one of the women who is an asserter, only 2 on her, the lowest possible score on the affirmer. And they were talking about like, well, you know, just the interplay between like this shadow in particular and the asserter shadow, like, am I being too direct or not? But it's also, again, like, it's also the role, if you know you're an affirmer, to really be like, am I just being overly sensitive? And if I am, let me, and here's the hard thing about choosing to stay out of your shadow, is that you are fighting every instinct that you have to be self-protective. That's the hard part about it. And that's the hard part about it for other people too. So everybody wants to trust their colleagues, but when they're super stressed out, it's really hard. There is a, in the information packet, there's the lead, I think it was the July, August edition. Anyway, there's the leadership playbook for thriving post-pandemic. It's a like 3,600 word article, and it's got, I always write my articles with tips. There's like 21 tips, but essentially that article is all about being a leader and staying out of your shadow and getting the most out of people. So Cynthia teases me, not everybody will read all, like, I don't know, 70 pages of my articles, but they're there if you want them. April or Carrie or Rachel, anybody, or Kathy, any other questions or comments? Or Lena, I don't want to leave you out.
Oh, I am sorry, had myself on mute. No, this was great. Thanks again for, basically a refresher from the larger course.
Excellent, excellent, great, great. All right, all right. Well, if anybody has any questions for me, reach out. Like I said, Cynthia put the items in the chat a couple times. I guess there's this weird phenomenon where if you're not on when things are put in the chat, you have to put them in again because you can't see prior chats. Some sort of privacy issue. But also I want to thank Lena actually for organizing us. That is always good. And I also want to thank Kathy and April for reaching out and asking me to do this. So thank you, everybody, and have a great Friday and an even better weekend.